Hello guys, this is Mrs. Levenseller here, and today we're going to talk about getting us ready to solve equations. So this is 2.1, and we're going to look at translating sentences into algebraic expressions and vice versa. If I give you an algebraic expression, can you write it in words? And then also part of your assignment today will be creating an expression that models a given situation. So the first thing that we want to talk about is some vocab, right? So how do we know what words mean what when we're translating? So we want to think about all of the different words that you've heard of before that mean the same thing in math, okay? So what I would like you to start with is the operations: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Those are going to be our 4 categories for the first part. I would like you to sketch this little table and then pause the video and brainstorm, okay? So pause the video, take a second, and write down any words you can think of that fall in these 4 categories, okay? And when you think you have at least a couple words for each one, come back and let's talk about them together. All right, so let's see what we came up with for add. And it could be a word or a phrase. I should specify that. So one of the key words that we will use for addition is sum, right? The sum of 2 things is talking about 2 values that have been added together. The word that's related to that for subtraction would be difference, right? The difference of 2 numbers is 2 numbers that have been subtracted. Multiplication, the word we can use for that is product, and division is quotient, all right? And all 4 of those words are talking about, the result after you do the addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So that's an interesting piece, and we're going to talk about that as also sort of a grouping word in a second as well. But let's see if we can add some more. So for addition, you could also say phrases like increased by or more than. Sometimes you could potentially use the words like greater than. That gets a little tricky because it's also similar to an inequality, right? So I think sticking with just increased by or more than would be best. Let's see. You can also say, added to or added with, or any of the words that have addition in them would be fine, but I don't think we need to generate all those. So some, increased by, more than, plus, anything like that represents addition. And I'm sure you guys have more words than that. We can brainstorm when we're all together on Thursday, I think it is. And let's talk about subtraction. So difference, less than a number, or a number less than. Actually, I'll make that a little more specific, so we don't think it's an inequality. So if I say like 5 less than or 10 less than, that would mean subtraction, right? So similar with addition, a number more than is addition, a number less than would be subtraction. We could say decreased by. We might say minus. Again, lots of words we could think of. We just want to generate, a solid starting list. Multiplication. So we have product written down. Some other words might be multiplied by. Or sometimes people will say doubled, right? And that means multiplied by 2, tripled, means multiplied by 3, quadrupled, means multiplied by 4. And that's, pretty much as far as we go with those. You might see the word, when we're translating, in context, the word per or the word of often means multiplication. So like, if they make $30 per hour, then you would multiply the $30 times the hours, right? That sort of represents multiplication. or when we see the word of, you know, I'm trying to think of a quick example. Well, we'll come back to that when my brain is better. But that can also mean multiplication. So then let's talk about division here. So quotient, we could have divided by. Any words that represent fractions, right? So like, 3 over 4 would be an example. That's really 3 divided by 4, right? Or what else could be division? If we talk about, breaking a piece, value into pieces, so like cutting a number into multiple pieces, or was split into multiple pieces, that would be some sort of division type problems. I'm trying to think of words that might be in the in context here. So quotient, divided by, all of those words could be used for division. Let's just see. I mean, you could say, simply, divided, or we're dividing this by this. And I think those are pretty much the most common ones. So you might have more of a substantial list here, and we can look through those or talk about those as a big group. But feel free to share with other classmates too if you guys are getting stuck. So those are the 4 main operations, like add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We want to be able to translate those. Today we're just really going to focus on expressions, but I want to also give you a few words for equations and inequalities, right? So when we're actually translating an equation, that means that we need something equal, right? We're going to have 2 quantities that are equal, all right? So you might see the word simple as equal to, but remember, equal also means the same. So the same as, that could potentially be a statement in there, or is the same as. You just might see the word is, right? If x is 5, that would mean that x is equal to 5. So any words like that mean that the 2 values are equivalent. All right. Equivalent expressions would mean that they are equal. When you get into geometry, you'll see words like congruent. All right. That also means that the values are equal. So that's a little geometry term there. Inequalities. Well, we know we have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So it's important that we are careful about the wording, because we also said that less than could potentially be, right, subtraction, right? So there's a difference here. If they say that, we have 10 less than a value, well, 10 less than a value is subtraction, right? But if I just say 10 is less than some value, right? That's when I want to use the inequality sign. So the word is, which sort of tells us that we're comparing 2 quantities, right? Is meaning that we want actually an inequality symbol and not a subtraction, because we wouldn't say 10 is less than a quantity and mean that we have a quantity x take away 10, right? 10 isn't less than here. 10, we have 10 less than the quantity. So very, very small differences in the wording that can make a big difference, right? So if I were writing something like that, this would be 10 less than a value. And in this case, we used x. But if I wrote 10 is less than a value, which we were using x, then it would be 10 less than x, written like that. So that word is the really important piece there, okay? And then lastly, we have greater than, or that one is you're greater than or equal to. All right, and same thing holds true there. You want to see the phrase is before these terms if we're actually going to use the symbol. All right, is really important when we're making equations or inequalities. And then the last thing is grouping. So there are a few phrases that mean that something is grouped together. And some of those phrases we already talked about. The sum, the difference, the product, and the quotient. All right. All of those things really represent that we've grouped two values together. So let's take two numbers. We'll say 5 and a number x, right? So the sum is the answer to an addition problem. So if I say the sum of 5 and a number x, well, then we want 5 plus x, but the sum is really this whole value, okay? So whenever you hear the word sum, difference, product, and quotient, think about that grouping as like it's in parentheses, okay? It's one value. It is the sum, which means it's the outcome of adding those two things. It's not just that the addition sign should show up, okay? Same if they said difference of 5 and a number. Well, then that would look like 5 minus x. When we see the word difference, okay, we want to make sure that we write the values in order that they show up. So if I say difference of 5 and a number x, 5 would come first and x would come second. And again, it's the answer to that. So it's the outcome of 5 minus x, okay? Now let's say we had the word product of 5 and a number x. Well, that would be 5 times x. Now multiplication is sort of implying that it's already a group, right? Because it makes it a term, one term. But you could include it in parentheses if you want to. So the product of 5 and a number x, the outcome of that, which is 5x, is the product, okay? And the quotient of 5 and a number x would be if we had, and again, quotient and difference work in similar ways. You're going to write them as you read them. So if it's the quotient of 5 and a number x, it's 5 divided by x. And it's the outcome of that. So similar to multiplication, 5 divided by x, well, it's already only one term, so those pieces are together. But we just want to think about it as the outcome. So you could use parentheses to group that together if you wanted to, right? So with the words difference and quotient, just to make a note here, you want to write the values as you read them. So if it said the difference of 5 and a number, we would want 5 minus x. If it said the difference of a number x and 5, then you would want x minus 5. So the order is really important with subtraction and division, right? Because if I put those in a different order, well, x divided by 5 could be a different number than 5 divided by x. But multiplication and addition, those are commutative, right? These are your commutative property. We can use that here. So that means we could have 5 plus x or x plus 5, right? And 5 times x or x times 5, and it's still the same answer. It doesn't change it. So with addition and multiplication, the order isn't as important, but with difference and quotient, the order matters. All right, so keep that in mind, and that's because of your commutative property, right? So let's just do a couple practice ones, and then I'll have you try some on your own. So the first directions say write an algebraic expression for each phrase, And our phrase is 5 less than, okay? So notice it does not say the word is, right? That's not there, so that means we're using subtraction. We're not using a less than symbol. So 5 less than the quotient, and so when that says the word quotient, I need the whole quantity, right? So that's all one piece. So I'm going to start by translating the group, okay, which is the quotient, all right? Oh, actually, and yeah, we have to go back and talk about one other thing I forgot about, but that's okay. The quotient of 7 and a number. So quotient means divide, right? So the answer to the division of 7 and a number, and they didn't give us a variable to use, so whenever you see the phrase a number, you can put any variable you want in for that. So I might use n, okay? So the quotient of 7 and a number I could write like that, or I could write as 7 divided by n. I want you guys to try and get away from using the old-fashioned division symbol, okay? Just because it's a little elementary. So when you write the quotient, see if you can write it as a fraction, okay? And then the beginning of the sentence says we have 5 less than the quotient, right? So think about it. If I told you had 5 less than 7, you would tell me that you have 2, right? Because you had 7 to start with and you took 5 away. So what you're really doing when you say 5 less than is you're subtracting that from the quantity, right? And in this particular case, the quantity was 7, but here, up here, the quantity is the quotient of 7 and a number, right? So we're going to take 7 divided by n, and we're going to subtract from that 5. So every time you see less than like that, the subtraction always comes second. All right. So one quick thing I forgot about, I got distracted when we were talking about all the grouping, is that you also might see the phrase the quantity of. Right? So anytime I say that to you, the quantity of, it means that you want to group whatever it is that I'm talking about, okay? Because the quantity of is, again, it's something that represents the result, right? So I want to know what's the result of this big quantity before I do anything else to it. And I think that's going to help us with this last problem here. So write a word or phrase for the algebraic expression. So in parentheses, we have 3x minus 10, and then a division bar, and then 4, right? Remember that this acts as a natural grouping symbol. So even if we didn't see the parentheses there, we would want to make sure we express that 3x minus 10 is grouped together, because otherwise you might just end up dividing 10 by 4 or just end up dividing 3x by 4, and that's not really what it's saying, okay? So first, let's start in the parentheses in the group just like we would with anything else with PEMDAS, and see if we can write an expression for 3x minus 10, all right? So think about what's happening here. We have 3 and x are being multiplied, and then 10 is being subtracted. Okay, well, because this is grouped together, there are two things we want to think about, and there's more than one way to write these. There's not one correct answer. So I'm going to show you a couple different ones, but one of the things we can think about is using one of the grouping words for subtraction, right? So let's use the difference word, because that tells us we're subtracting, right? So I'm going to start by saying the difference of, and then remember when we say the difference or the quotient, we need to write the two things that are being subtracted or divided in order. So the first thing that shows up is 3x. So the difference of, and we might say 3 times a number and 10, right? Because the difference is being found from taking 3x and 10 and subtracting. And I had to break down that it wasn't, I don't just want to write 3x, I want to write the operations happening between them. So the difference of 3 times a number and 10, and whenever I see difference, I imply that I'm grouping, those two things together. And then the other piece of this is that we have divided by 4, right? So after this, we could then say is divided by 4, right? You could also say over 4 if you wanted to change the wording there. Both of those would be fine. But let's say you didn't want to use the word difference, right? You could also do this by saying the quantity of. So the quantity of 3 times a number minus 10. Oh, I didn't mean to write the minus sign. Minus 10. So the quantity of 3 times a number minus 10. Now I'm going to put a comma because it separates that thought from the next, divided by 4. Right? Without the comma there, then I might think that just 10 is divided by 4, and that's not what I want to imply. Or you could say the quantity of 10 less than 3 times a number divided by 4. Right? Again, comma important, so I know I'm separating those two thoughts. So there are millions of ways you could write these. These are 3 examples, and I'm sure you could come up with some more genius ways to write that. So remember that there's not just one right way to do this, but I do want you to try and use all the vocabulary that you can. And if you get stuck or you need help, you could always Google, some different translating words for math, or you can visit the video, or send me an email if you get stuck.